everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Janet Foster Show, the show where you get real talk for action. And today is primary day, and you can get social with me right now on Facebook at Janet Foster and on Twitter at Janet D. Foster and on Instagram at Janet D. Foster. And, it's primary day. And as we promised that we'll talk about the results. And I have a guest that's going to be joining in a bit. But before we get started, I definitely wanted to kind of give you a rundown of tonight because here, West Coast time, the polls have just closed in all of the states. Tonight's primary, just as a recap, for those of us here on the West Coast, there are 5 states. I know sometimes we get a little caught up in our lives here on the West Coast. 5 states, and those 5 states are Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And these are pivotal states because potentially tonight the nomination process for both parties could be over because right now Donald Trump is standing with 927 delegates and he only needs 1,237 to capture the nomination for the Republicans. And right now he's shy 310. If he picks up 310 tonight between those 5 states, he will go on. And on the Democratic side of the House, to secure the nomination, the winner would need to have 2,383 delegates to wrap up the nomination. Right now, the way things stand, Hillary Clinton is at 1,999. So she needs 384 delegates tonight to close this out. And Bernie Sanders, he's at 1,213 right now. And, this has been, I know for voters, it's been quite a contentious process for both parties. I think much more active for Democrats. For Republicans. And, we've had Republican guests on, and it just turns out that they've done quite a bit. And I think a lot of it has to do with how the process started so early. I think a lot of us may have voter fatigue, and particularly for those of us here on the West Coast, we are definitely individuals who are quite fatigued, and we haven't even picked up our own state primaries, and we vote in June, and potentially, although we're still going to go through the motions. Potentially, we will still go through the motions of voting, but the majority could be decided tonight. And what I wanted to talk about tonight, since both parties potentially they may have their nominees by the end of the night, I want to talk about potential vice presidents because I think people have been so, disillusioned by the choices for the top of the ticket. No one's really talked about the bottom of the ticket. And the bottom of the ticket can make a difference. For Republicans, it's going to be interesting if Trump gets the nomination because there have been so many, current elected officials that it'll be interesting who he selects. And it's definitely somebody who potentially could be a dark horse. Maybe Sarah Palin, we don't know. Maybe someone sensible, we don't know. That's going to be a whole mix. A whole mix of decisions to come up with. And I want to ask our guests, my guest, when when we get that chance. But what I want to talk about too is the partnership between Cruz and Kasich. And just for some of you first timers, this is something that's unusual in politics. There have never been two competitors that have said, we're going to work together to try to unseat someone. And that's been the most interesting part of this race. And over the weekend, quite a few journalists, we've talked about that scenario and kind of what would it look like, and potentially what that would mean for the Republican Party. And the Republican Party definitely is not the same party it was, I'd say, 6 months ago, as a result of this. And knowing that you have two candidates in the second and third place, where they take 51%, basically in your polling data, 51% of your base prefer them. It is something to think about, and it does sound like there may be some establishment talk. And I know that there have been some discussions with establishment individuals, and it's been kind of a difficult thing for them to kind of come to grasp with, because the RNC, their main job really is to make sure that kind of the nomination process is fair. And if it does, go to the floor, as we've been hearing for months, that potentially nominations could come from the floor, that process. And I mentioned before that each of these parties, they have their own guidelines. They have their own code of ethics. They have their own policies and procedures. And this is, for most of us, Gen Xers and millennials, we read about this stuff in our history books. We may have seen some old footage, depending on how extensive maybe your high school curriculum was. We may have been exposed to seeing some of that on film, but not actually living it, which we are going to do that. And then on the Democratic side, it's definitely something that we will see if that's a possibility, but it's highly unlikely that there'll be any delegates on the floor. And just now, with the first state reporting a winner, and that is Delaware. Hillary Clinton has won Delaware with 100% of the precincts reporting, and there are 21 delegates at stake, and these delegates will be awarded proportionately between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And right now, the count is Hillary Clinton is at 2,089 delegates, and Bernie Sanders is at 1,258. So, it potentially could be over, because the one we are waiting to see is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 189 delegates up for grabs. And right now they have 9% of the precincts reporting. And they've initially called the race in Pennsylvania in Hillary Clinton's favor, and they've already awarded her 90 of those delegates, and Sanders has 45 of those delegates. And Maryland has 95 delegates, and right now there's 1% of the precincts reporting, so we should get numbers on that. And she was polling extremely high in that particular area, and that's going to be an area to keep watch, because for the Democratic race, the other side of kind of where we talk about the where it's always called the DMV area, the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. Hillary Clinton won Virginia, and those areas are pretty similar, and not only in terms of politics, but also in terms of what regionally, what's important to those areas. And you have a very large African American population, as well as a growing Latino population, particularly in the greater suburbs of Baltimore. So that's going to be an area to watch. And Rhode Island, right now, they haven't called that race. They're 43% of the precincts reporting, and right now Bernie Sanders leads, which that's a state that was expected out of all 5 of the states that have primaries. Rhode Island is the only one that has an open primary. Delaware, Connecticut, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, these are all closed primaries, meaning in closed primaries, only registered Democrats can vote, and no independents can vote. And so, which means in those states, the party base is actually, going. And let's see, with Rhode Island, let's see how Rhode Island is going. Rhode Island has Bernie Sanders right now he's running with 57% of the vote, with 43% of the precincts reporting, and Hillary Clinton is running at 41%. And that it's going to be interesting to see the 2 New England states, Rhode Island and Connecticut, and how Connecticut goes. And right now, with 32% of the precincts reporting, Bernie Sanders is up with 50% of the vote, and Hillary Clinton is coming in at 48% of the vote. They're pretty close. The number of votes that have been counted so far, ballots that have been counted in Connecticut, and is 52,336 for Bernie Sanders, and for Hillary Clinton, 50,350. So it's pretty close, and they haven't gotten to. And these are what I'm understanding here is based on data from West Connecticut. And so we haven't gotten to eastern Connecticut and the southern part. So that'll be interesting to see. And Delaware has already called the race for Hillary Clinton. Now 96% of the precincts are reporting, and she has 59, almost 60% of the vote in the state of Delaware. So that's pretty strong. And Delaware has now Pennsylvania has been called now for Hillary Clinton, although 13% of the precincts are reporting based on votes come in today, but it looks like also based on absentee ballots. Hillary Clinton has won Pennsylvania, and she's received 90 delegates so far. And there's 189. So as the percentages between her and Bernie Sanders, how it fluctuates, she'll get more delegates. So right now, that's where they've got her standing at, I think it's 2,089, based on some of the preliminary data. Out over to the Republican race, with the Republicans, with Donald Trump. So far we're not seeing any big numbers. The allocation hasn't come yet. Oh, okay. Connecticut was just called for Donald Trump. And right now he has they've given him 16 delegates, and he has about 61% of the vote in Connecticut. And 33% of the precincts are reporting. John Kasich is coming in second, and he has a little over 25%. And then Ted Cruz has a little over 12%, which it appears that it's even less than the average 50% that they're polling. So even combined, they couldn't handle Trump in Connecticut. And in Delaware, the Republicans have called Delaware for, let's see here, they've called Delaware for Donald Trump. and 96% of the precincts are reporting. So pretty much they've awarded all of the delegates to Donald Trump. Because the Republicans, I think I mentioned, Republicans have this: if you achieve more than 50%, you get the majority, and then the next competitive person, if they achieve, I think it's over 50%. Well, they wouldn't achieve 50%. They could. They may split with that person, because then that means someone wouldn't get anything. But that didn't happen here. And again, in Delaware, Donald Trump has taken more than 61%. So he's been consistent between Connecticut and Delaware. 60% of the vote of Republicans voting have selected Trump. And they've also called Maryland and Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. So this is a sweep for Donald Trump. In Maryland, Maryland has 38 delegates up for grab. Right now, they've awarded him, Donald Trump has 26 delegates, and he's right at about 52%. So he rises above that a little bit more. If he goes with his what seems to be pulling 60% of the vote, he will Donald Trump will get those 38 delegates, and definitely he could be well on his way to the Republican nomination. And Pennsylvania has 17 delegates, and with 16% of the precincts reporting, the race has been called, and he has earned all 17 of those delegates, and it's 50. He has 59% of the vote there in Pennsylvania, which this looks like a lot of Republicans stayed home. It looks like there's some boycotting going on, because the numbers, the tally numbers are really low, even with that amount of precincts reporting. Rhode Island, 19 delegates up for grabs, and right now they've called it for Donald Trump. They've awarded him 7 delegates, and he is at about he's right at 66% of voters. And definitely, it seems that Kasich is the number 2 guy. He's been the preferred number 2 person on the East Coast. Ted Cruz came in second in Pennsylvania, but John Kasich has been consistent as the number 2. So there's an East Coast connection, but it looks like the Republican turnout has been very low in terms of their numbers, because for these races to be called at the time that they're being called, and the numbers that are involved are quite low. And on the Democratic side, we are now at Hillary Clinton is now at 2,097 votes, and Bernie Sanders is at 1,271. And the delegate counts, I'm looking for those. Let's see. Rhode Island has been called for Bernie Sanders, and he has 56% of the vote in that state. So he picked up in Rhode Island 13 delegates, and Hillary Clinton has 8 delegates for that state. And still, the race hasn't been called in Connecticut. 36% of the precincts called. Bernie Sanders, right now, he is at 51% of the vote, and Hillary Clinton is at 48. She's still at 48% of the vote. So this one is being considered too close to call. It looks like there's a strong, robust turnout among Democrats, and this is a closed primary, so this is a pretty competitive race for that state. And Maryland, they've divided a good portion of the delegates now. Hillary Clinton has won 46 of them, and Bernie Sanders has 17, but there's still a total of 95. And Hillary is still running at about 68% of the vote there in Maryland. And in Pennsylvania, 189 delegates. So the separation right now is Hillary Clinton's got 58% of the vote, and she has 90. She's so far of the 189, she's earned 90 of those delegates. And Bernie Sanders, he has 45 of those delegates from Pennsylvania, and there's still more to be divided up. So this race will continue more than likely overnight. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about was vice presidents. It's a potential. This week and over the weekend, the Clinton campaign, they've kind of pivoted in the sense of planning for the future, and there has been suggestions of potential running mates, and some of the key individuals that their names that keep coming up. They're actually good names. One of the first early on recommendations and kind of the most popular and has been for sure for Hillary Clinton to think about the party base. Definitely after such a contentious nomination process, and some of the names that have come up have been Tom Perez and Secretary of Labor Tom Perez as an option, and and then also Julian Castro, which Tom Perez would be a good choice for Hillary Clinton. But I think if you're thinking of a short list, and I'm going to give you my short list, Julian Castro would be on my short list. And one of the reasons why is I think it's going to bridge generations. It's going to bridge the Gen Xers, and it's going to bridge, I think, with the baby boomers, because in this race, the main commentary has been about a lot of the candidates right now, the youngest candidate that's running for the presidency is Ted Cruz. And pretty much everybody else is well over 65, which we all know, and regular rank and file American terms. Most people don't keep their jobs that long. Because of, there are a myriad of reasons, but most people are retired. They don't have the type of job that these individuals are doing. And I think on average, when you take the most senior individuals running, I think their average age comes up to be about, I think it's 67.3, which that's not good, but it's something to think about. And I like Julian Castro. He not only is he a young guy, but he's a young, qualified guy. And when I say qualified, when you start looking at Gen Xers, most of us have, most Gen Xers have worked other jobs before doing anything else. He fits the profile of a Gen Xer before getting into public office. For some of you who may not be familiar with him, other than knowing that he is Latino, he's Mexican American, born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and he is the former mayor of San Antonio, and then he's currently He's currently in the Obama administration as the HUD secretary. And I think the balance, I think with Julian Castro, because of the fact that he hails from Texas, which, that's going to be something significant for the Democratic Party after this such a divisive, I think a divisive nominating process. A serious Democrat should look at Julian Castro for the main reason of shoring up the Latino base. And I know the diaspora is huge, but by having Julian Castro on a ticket, this will solidify the South, and particularly it will do great positioning in the state of Texas, because the state of Texas right now is purple. It's no longer the red state that it once was. It's no longer the blue state that it once was. And Julian Castro has such a great appeal. And that's why I like him for that, because he's a Gen Xer. Another name that's been floating around, another Gen Xer, is Cory Booker. Love Cory Booker, former Newark mayor. And, what he did in that city, how he turned that city around. And I know there are some residents that they feel like they didn't get what they thought they were getting. But you got to give the man his props. He made the place better than what it was. It's Newark. Newark no longer is the laughingstock that it was. Hate to offend anybody, but it's true. And the city itself was riddled in a lot of corruption, cronyism for decades, not just years, but for decades. And the fact that they actually had a month where they had no murders that happened on his watch after, and I think the month that it happened, they had to go all the way back to the 60s to go back to peaceful times, which is that's kind of very telling. But he did a great job. And then, of course, he's currently the junior senator from New Jersey. I like him as a VP pick, but the thing about Senator Booker is he's in a state right now that has a Republican governor, and obviously, if he joins the ticket wins. The Senate becomes affected by that, and that's why I kind of think that's why I kind of put him strategically second under Julian Castro. I think the only scenario that a Cory Booker as a VP would happen is if in these down ticket races for the Senate, somehow the Democrats pick up the majority and they've got room to spare. That's what that would be the scenario that would make Cory Booker a great candidate, a potential candidate for that. But it doesn't seem to be an option at the moment, and it's because of the Chris Christie factor. So I like it, but it's more than likely not going to happen. But another name that for the Democrats as a vice president pick is Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown, he is what he's definitely been a great senator from the state of Ohio. What I like about him is on the issues, he tends to be he's definitely not a single issue kind of conformist. And he's been pretty consistent. And to be in a state like Ohio, you kind of you've gotta have not only appeal, but you've got to be consistent in I think a lot of what you stand for. And he has done that. He did that as a member of Congress and as a member of the Senate. I think he would do well. And I think that he would be helpful because Ohio is such a pivotal swing state, And for Hillary Clinton, I think he would be a good choice. He is a little bit younger. I think he's in his early 60s, so he's definitely not 65. But he is a good pick. Another pick is Martin O'Malley, and we all know him because he ran for president and he suspended his campaign. See, he never outright canceled it. When people suspend their campaign, they still keep their delegates. So he still has delegates. And, he potentially could be someone to maybe say, you know what, I'm going to give Hillary Clinton my delegates. And, I don't think it was that many. I don't think he had 60. But he has delegates and he does have an appeal. He's 53, which is definitely remarkably younger. And what I do like about Martin O'Malley, he didn't stand out as a candidate, I think, as a top ticket candidate, but what he brings to the table is he's the former mayor of Baltimore and former governor. And that, those two levels, those two layers of managing government, as well as those two types of executive roles, I think would be good, a good complement to Hillary Clinton, because Hillary is great on the federal level, and then someone like a Martin O'Malley, he would do a great job at speaking at state, giving a state perspective as well as a city perspective. And a lot of individuals in public office, they don't even have the executive level experience at the mayoral level. And as a mayor, you don't look at party politics. You look at the problem that you're dealing with and you try to get it done. So Martin O'Malley brings that to the table, similar to Julian Castro, with the exception Julian Castro, he has the mayor experience to offer. What I like about really all of them, they're all good. They're all, so far, all of them are attorneys. But I think with Martin O'Malley, what just makes him stand out is he's got the right kind of seasoning. If somehow Julian Castro maybe something didn't happen with that, and I already explained how Cory Booker, it's probably not going to happen because of the Chris Christie factor. And Sherrod Brown, he would be good, but he's a little older. Martin O'Malley, he's kind of that sweet spot. That would be a good choice for Hillary Clinton to select. Another name that a lot of people have been talking about, which when I heard it before researching, it was Al Franken. And Al Franken, I think about him as I still think about him from his Saturday Night Live days, but he's a very passionate person and very vocal, and he would definitely be a good pick for vice president. And we're going to pause here at this moment, and we have my guest that's on. And listeners, I want to introduce you to David Khalif. And he is the host of a show called Inside Politics, and based out of Columbia, South Carolina. You can listen to him on Sundays between 6 and 7 Eastern time, which means that's 3 o'clock here on the West Coast. And his show is based on stations 95.9 FM and 1470 AM The Point. And David, are you on the line?
Yes, hi. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, great. I'm glad that you can join us. I kind of went through some of the preliminary results that we've gotten for both races, and it looks like things are going to be going through the night before we determine whether both parties will have their nominees, but it's getting really, really close. And David, what I wanted to ask you was I kind of shared some of the what I share with some of the listeners is I go over a little bit of the journalist pool kind of that I circulate with, where we talk about what we're hearing in terms of either vice presidential nominations and kind of looking at vetting it and looking at the likelihood. And that's kind of what I was sharing, the likelihood of vice presidents. And just from your perspective there in South Carolina, you guys have already voted. Kind of what's the tenor or the mood there in South Carolina as it results to both these races, both the Republican nomination process and the Democratic process?
Well, I think South Carolina is from the primary back in February. There was a huge turnout for the primaries, and Hillary had a pretty substantial win and victory against Bernie Sanders and Trump as well on the Republican side. So I think that kind of mirrors the results from South Carolina's primary, where Trump pretty handily spanked Ted Cruz and other Republican candidates, and Hillary pretty much did her thing again tonight. Trump sweeping most of the states from
he swept them all.
Yeah, so it's a great night. But I think it's a great night for Democrats on two fronts. One, Hillary's it's over for, Bernie Sanders run a great campaign. I respect him, and I think he'd be great as well. But, the facts, numbers don't lie. They say men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. Mm-hmm. And Hillary Clinton just has millions of more votes as the delegates, and it's time to rally around her the same way that she told her supporters to do for President Obama. And then it's a win-win again, because on the Republican side, Trump is winning, and the GOP establishment can't stand it, and they're split. They're torn because they can't stand him. They can't stand Ted Cruz.
Right.
And I think it's a great win-win for us, because Donald Trump alienates every voting bloc except older white males. So I think it's a great night, a double whammy for us. And I think if Trump is the GOP nominee, I think Democrats take the Senate back. I think we'll get the White House. I don't know about the House gerrymandering, but it's going to look like a landslide if Donald Trump is a nominee. He's pretty much angered the Latino voting base.
Yeah.
He's angered women voters.
Yes.
People based on religion, Muslim, people of Islamic faith.
Yes.
So you run down the line, and he's made pretty bad comments down the line to every voting demographic just about. So he's really cornered, and his unpopularity numbers are through the roof.
Yeah. And something that I noted, and just looking at some of the data that's coming in, it looks like there was low turnout on the Republican side, very low in some states. And that, because what's happened is he won these states, but what was interesting was, based on polling data, you remember over the weekend there was this supposed partnership between Kasich and Cruz, because they seem to combine for 51% of likely voters, and they're getting hammered. Well, they got hammered basically with Trump winning all of them, because he's taken some states in 60%. 60% of the vote in Connecticut, and I think he's got 62% in Delaware and Maryland, which I was really surprised. But he's 54%, which he's an underachiever there, but he's definitely he's hammering them, and combined, they're not getting what they thought. They're not getting that 50%. So, I mean, he got 60% of the Republican vote in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's sort of unheard of, and Kasich, which I'm so surprised, he came in last. And knowing that, Ohio borders Pennsylvania, and the fact that Ted Cruz came in in a second. It's astounding.
Definitely astounding. In Kasich, I think the Republican voters have said we don't want him. I think the GOP establishment's trying to force Kasich on the GOP voters, and the voters are tired of it. They're tired, particularly in the GOP base. They want something different, and Trump is definitely different.
And the tenor here in California with some of the reporters that are covering the Republican beat here has been, there are going to be Republicans who are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Here in California, we have a semi-open. This will be the first presidential, election process of doing that. The Democrats are semi-open. Republicans are closed. Well, Republicans can go in the semi-open and ask for the Democratic ballot. And there are some that are going to do that for Hillary Clinton. And she's polling high among women, Republican women in California doing that.
And you even had one of the Koch brothers saying that Hillary Clinton might be a better president than the Republican nominee, and he's talking about Trump.
Yes, that was, we talked about that over the weekend. That was Charles Koch. And, when I saw the clip, and I also had a copy of the New York Times, I kind of had to double take because I thought, wow. And of course, right after Hillary Clinton clapped back with her version of a no thank you. So, so she was kind of like, nah, I got 99 problems and you ain't one. So
you can keep that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's sort of like, no, I know that's loaded, but that does say a lot because knowing, the whole Koch brothers machine, the alliance with Sheldon Adelson, some of these well-heeled billionaires, it's almost like the Trump phenomenon is the ghost of elections past for Republicans coming back to haunt them because they have a base that's associated with them that is not their base. It's people they have courted to make them think they were a part of the Republican Party, and they're now taking over.
Yeah, they've created Frankenstein, and it's come back to bite them. And I think, when it comes to Donald Trump, I think he has, 68% unfavorability ratings. And,
yes.
He's going to try to run to the middle once he gets the Republican nomination. But the good thing is we have months and months of him on tape saying, build this wall and banning Muslims for the next several years. Saying that Mexicans that come over the border are rapists and criminals. And
yes.
So we have a lot of Trump's outlandish, outrageous comments on tape. So he's going to try to run to the middle in the general election and try to soften his image. But I think he's just really made so many outlandish comments in the primaries that's going to hurt him in the general election. He won't be able to move to the middle. He'll be in the corner of the right wing. Exactly.
I was talking about some potential vice presidential nominees for the Democrats, and a couple. Some of the top four names that have come up have been Sherrod Brown out of Ohio because of the connection with that state being a swing state. Martin O'Malley, former presidential candidate, his experience as a governor, as a mayor, the mayor of Baltimore. And kind of his progressiveness at being a governor and mayor, and then of course Cory Booker, junior senator out of New Jersey, and Julian Castro, the former San Antonio mayor and this HUD secretary. And my two favorites, if I could pick a dream team, would be Julian Castro and Cory Booker. I would lean more towards Julian Castro just for the reason that he's from Texas. Texas is a state that it's no longer red. It's no longer blue the way it was with Ann Richards, but it's purple now, and it's ripe for taking. And it's got in terms of the electoral votes. And then Julian Castro is a young guy. He's 41, I think 42. He's got a twin, so they got a spare that they can have him run for governor of Texas, his twin brother. I mean, a Stanford undergrad, Harvard Law, both he and his brother. And of course, he's, I think, a good example for securing the Latino vote, even though the diaspora is huge. I think he just seems to fit. Corey, the only issue I have with Corey is the potential, the whole Chris Christie factor with him being governor. And, depending on how the Senate races go, if we get that extra cushion with the Senate, maybe Cory Booker. But if it's running too close, no Cory Booker, just because we don't want a Republican being appointed to the Senate to have, if they've given President Obama the obstruction, it could be potentially even worse if, with a Democratic president and a female president. Those are some of my thoughts. Have you in your circles thought of any VP picks for either parties?
Well, I think Julian Castro would be great. I'm glad you mentioned his name. I think he just fits everything, all the criteria. He's up and coming superstar in the Democratic Party, much like President Obama was. Mm-hmm. He had a great speech at the Democratic Convention back in 2012, much like Obama did in 2004. As you mentioned, Texas is purple, more and more turning blue, and I think Julian Castro represents the future of the Democratic Party. And I think the Latino vote's going to be crucial in the upcoming election. And Trump has already, he keeps saying, build this wall. And, of course, the rapist comments he made about Mexicans and all the hideous comments he's tried to make about people who immigrate or migrate over the borders. So he's definitely angered already the Latino base. But I think adding Julio Castro to the ticket would be great. He's a young, rising star who I think would only solidify the Latino vote. And, the Republicans know it. I mean, Mitt Romney did terrible with the Latino vote. There was the famous self-deportation quote that he made back in 2012.
Yes.
And I don't even think he got into the 20s. And I think, one of the reasons George W. Bush, he lost and cheated the first time, but the second time with John Kerry, what put him over was he did pretty solid. I mean, he still lost, but for a Republican, he did pretty well with the Latino vote, being from Texas, and he was not an unpopular governor with Latinos in Texas as well. So I think Republicans could learn from what Bush did, but instead they do the opposite.
Yeah.
So I think Julian Castro would be a great pick, or I think Deval Patrick would be good, but I haven't heard his name mentioned much as well.
He was someone I was going to get to. Deval Patrick has been mentioned, and actually, supposedly, there's been some vetting discussions, and also, I think Amy Klobuchar has been floated around too. Now, interesting enough, I want to go on the other side of the aisle. There's been talk, with Trump, you just never know what you're dealing with. You kind of think maybe Sarah Palin, but there's also been a lot of talk about your state's governor, Nikki Haley, as a potential, particularly, should if and when. It's inevitable when Hillary Clinton gets the nomination, that Nikki Haley could potentially be that second person on the ticket, whether it's Trump or someone from the floor.
I think it could possibly be Governor Haley if Trump doesn't get enough delegates, and it looks like he will. If he didn't, I could see him and Cruz pairing up, but it looks like he's going to get delegates needed. But if he didn't, I could see him and Cruz pairing up, combining each other's delegates to be the nominee. They make a deal where Cruz is the vice president, but if not and he gets the delegates, I could see him going with Nikki Haley because his numbers are terrible with women voters.
Yeah.
It's even worse with female voters. And Nikki Haley, I think, could possibly end up being the next Sarah Palin. I mean, she's not as
really
on the dumb side as Sarah Palin. Yeah, I think she's a fraud. I think, on the national side, people outside of South Carolina, they see some of the stuff she's done and comments she makes, but she's a terrible debater. Her debates with her opponent, State Senator Shaheen, he cleaned her clock both times he ran against her. But she had the benefit of South Carolina being such a red state right now. And she also got lucky where she ran in midterm elections. She didn't run in national elections when President Obama ran. It would have been a little bit more competitive. I think the first time she did run during a presidential election, and she lost by like 4 or 5 points. But the second time she won by like over 10 points because it was a midterm election. Voter turnout was lower, particularly with Democrats. And I think she's not all up. She's made out to be, even with the Confederate flag. She was pretty much a phony when it came to that. It was only after the Charleston shooting that she came on board with it. Just less than 5 or 6 months before that, she was debating Shaheen on stage, and she was saying she's never had a employer or corporation that was thinking about bringing jobs to South Carolina not mention the Confederate flag. So she was defending the Confederate flag being up there. But then when the Charleston shooter, the horrendous shooting in Charleston, she saw that it was a national spotlight, and as a politician who wants to be a VP pick, and also Reince Priebus, RNC chairman, came down to South Carolina and I think basically told her, hey, you guys need to go ahead and not make this an issue anymore with the Confederate flag. And she pretty much took the marching orders. But she is a fraud. I think if she's up in a debate with Castro, I think we'll probably get her clock clean. She's very scripted. She never does media interviews. Never does media interviews. Even with Republican radio shows, they can't get her on.
Wow.
Even when she was running for office. So she's got handlers. She's got spokespeople that are pretty clever with their words. But she doesn't give much media access at all.
Oh, wow.
So it'd be interesting to see how she does. It could be another, I forgot the name of the movie with Sarah Palin. Where she was,
that Julianne Moore played her. So you mean she's just as bad? I would have never thought.
I don't think she makes, I don't think she's made the comments to Sarah Palin. She's probably not as dumb, but I think when it comes to Nikki Haley, though, I don't think she's really been in a national spotlight. Like Sarah Palin, I think, was probably protected in Alaska, and even the people of Alaska probably didn't know how dumb she was. But I think if Nikki Haley is under a microscope, national news, New York Times, and all the news networks asking her questions day in and day out, and she's not able to be scripted and she has to be spontaneous, I could see her being exposed on a national spotlight. So,
wow. Thanks for that insight. We're going to have to cut on out, and definitely we have to have you back. And I want to thank you for joining me, David. And listeners, you can listen to him on Inside Politics on 95.
It's been a pleasure.
Definitely, and we will be in touch soon. You're an official friend to the show. And to my listeners, keep your emails, Facebooks, and everything coming. And we'll see you the next time when we see you. And thank you to everyone, and thank you to Jeremy Hansen for helping make this thing go. Everyone, have a great week, and we'll see you when we see you.